all of these executive orders are gone. So all of the good things that the Trump administration has done is going to go away on day one. And so what we actually need to see Congress do is we need them to step up. We need them to take the good executive orders and we need them to enshrine them in law. I think a great example from the last Trump administration that was something we were really excited to see was an executive order that required every agency to post for public access any type of guidance letter or guidance document that they sent to a regulated person or business to say, here's how we would apply it to your business or to the question that you have for us. There are thousands and thousands of those out there that are not publicly transparent, that essentially create new regulations in these letters. And so the Trump administration said last time, every one of these need to be posted publicly in a database. On day one of the Biden administration, they repealed that executive order and those websites quickly disappeared. So all of that is now gone.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. Today's episode is another of our Big Ideas for Smaller Government series. And the idea of this series is to talk about spending and regulation cuts that could be made to the federal government with our goal of cutting $2 trillion. This is the 10th episode in this series, and over this series, we've talked about different government departments like Health and Human Services, for example, and how they're spending money on things like a study that basically proves marketing works on teens when it comes to junk food. Then there's the Department of Education, which has funding for a disaster recovery unit, even though we already have FEMA for that. But we haven't just pointed out the waste. We've also offered some solutions. Like, for instance, at the Department of Agriculture, where they have over 80 programs. One way to cut down on fraud, waste, and abuse would be to streamline the application process with a single e-verification system. So, in this episode, we want to look at what Congress and the president could actually do to start trimming the budget and rolling back some of the unnecessary regulations. I want to welcome our guest, Jeremiah Mosteller, who is the policy director for Americans Prosperity and has been our guest for this series. Jeremiah, welcome.
David, so excited to be here with you again. And we are going to talk about our favorite subject. So it doesn't get any better than this. This is the highlight of my week.
Well, that's great. Yeah, it seems like a weekly deal for us. And of course, it's a highlight for me, too. So I always do love talking to you and appreciate you joining us and really bringing some great expertise. I mean, I find these super interesting. I hope our listeners do, because I learn a lot. I mean, there's real savings out there that we really can cut into to save taxpayers money, cut down waste, fraud, and abuse. So it's really been exciting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, David. And I think one of the cool things that we've been able to do is identify ways to reform programs, not cut them, but actually save substantial billions and billions of dollars just by figuring out better ways to do things, improving efficiency, rather than actually taking away services.
Well, it's something that I think a lot of us who believe in limited government have always wanted. We've always believed that there's ways to do things smarter and more efficiently without cutting, the services that a lot of people depend upon, or that there's just a lot of extraneous things or sweetheart deals or, just waste that we could save an enormous amount of money on. And I think what this conversation is showing is that suspicion is absolutely true.
David, that's right. That's right. I mean, I think one of the things is we're providing transparency for your listeners about what the federal government is actually doing. And you and I both know that's the first step in being able to take out government waste, is actually knowing what they're wasting the money on.
Well, hey, let's just start with a basic thing. Has Congress, we've been talking a lot about the executive branch, right? And agencies and executive orders, but has Congress done anything yet to deal with reducing regulations or cutting spending?
Yeah, David. So I think there's two exciting things that they've done so far. The first, which is happening right now, this week, as we speak, in the process of reauthorizing the Trump tax cuts, they've taken a hard look at spending in all of the committees, and they're cutting billions and billions of dollars across a number of agencies and spending to go alongside the tax cuts that Trump wants to see reauthorized. So that's exciting. Number one, really exciting to see. There's more they could do there, but it's a great first step from Congress. And then second, we've also seen a piece of legislation, which I know we'll talk about a little bit more today, called the REINS Act, included in those bills as well, which would really rein in this bloat and just overreach from the agencies. But sadly, to give some bad news, they have been unwilling to take up a rescissions package that the White House sent over which would actually enshrine and make permanent some of the savings that DOGE has identified.
Really? I'm actually not as familiar with that. What does a rescission package consist of?
Yeah. So at its basic level, rescission package is the White House saying, hey, we don't think we need to spend this money. We want to give it back to the taxpayers. And Congress, please rubber stamp this. So rather than just pausing this spending, we can actually not spend it. So it actually requires Congress to kind of sign off on that step. And there are a few things that is in this package. We've not actually seen the text of it, but we know some of the details. There would be some cuts to NPR and PBS funding, as well as making permanent some of the cuts that were made at USAID. And so it's Congress's job. They should be willing to vote up or down on this, but it seems that Congress doesn't even want to take up the vote in the first place.
Well, hopefully they'll change their minds and get the will to do it. So tell me about how Congress can deal with some of the, looking back at some of the misguided Biden era regulations. Like, how can they use the Congressional Review Act to deal with those?
Yeah. David, I mean, you and I both know the Biden administration sought to regulate and essentially control massive parts of our lives, from what types of cars we can drive to what types of appliances we can have in our house to how we can do our jobs. And so one of the things we've been talking about a lot to Congress is how they can step in, use the Congressional Review Act to actually repeal some of those harmful and misguided Biden era regulations. And at its core, in a very, very simple way, what the Congressional Review Act does is it gives Congress 60 days to review regulations passed by agencies and to determine that they don't want those to go into effect. And so they pass a resolution telling the agency, hey, you can't do this. So what Congress has been able to do so far this year is that anything in the last 60 days of last year gets a clock reset. And so for the first 60 working days of this Congress, they could go back and they could actually say, hey, we don't like these regulations, and so we're going to actually prevent them from going into effect. And so we've actually seen the Senate pass 14 resolutions of this type. We've seen the House pass 15 resolutions related to Biden era regulations. And when you combine those numbers, only 9 have actually made it to the president's desk. So they've actually overturned 9 regulations so far. I think there's many more we would want to see them take action on, but it's good to see them using this authority to actually go back and look at those books and say, nope, that's not what we want you to do, and repeal those bad regulations.
Yeah, that is good. Now going over to what the administration's done, President Trump has signed, I think, over 150 executive orders. And as we've seen with previous executive orders, they can be overturned by the next administration. So what should Congress do with some of those EOs?
Yeah, David, I mean, the reality is that on day one of the next administration, all of these executive orders are gone. So all of the good things that the Trump administration has done is going to go away on day one. And so what we actually need to see Congress do is we need them to step up. We need them to take the good executive orders and we need them to enshrine them in law. I think a great example from the last Trump administration that was something we were really excited to see was an executive order that required every agency to post for public access any type of guidance letter or guidance document that they sent to a regulated person or business to say, here's how we would apply it to your business or to the question that you have for us. There are thousands and thousands of those out there that are not publicly transparent, that essentially create new regulations in these letters. And so the Trump administration said last time, every one of these need to be posted publicly in a database. On day one of the Biden administration, they repealed that executive order and those websites quickly disappeared. So all of that is now gone.
That's just incredible. I mean, what purpose could there be to shut down the transparency of how the government is talking to its people?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so incredible.
It is astounding that this is something that agencies think they can do without transparency. Now, the good thing is that we actually have a piece of legislation in Congress called the Guidance Out of Darkness Act that would take that executive order and make it law. And so it will become permanent that agencies have to do this. And so we've been urging Congress to pass this piece of legislation. It has already passed the House twice. And so we just need our senators to step up and adopt this and get it to the president's desk.
Wow, that's good news. I'm optimistic about that. So, we've talked about how to make spending cuts ad nauseum. We've talked about a lot of spending cuts, but cutting regulations also helps. And President Trump signed an executive order addressing this. And what did it do?
Yeah, so he's actually signed 3 executive orders related to this, David. So he's been pretty busy. For those naysayers out there who might say President Trump doesn't care about cutting regulations, he's done 3. So in February, there was an executive order that was for DOGE that required every agency to go through and look at all of their regulations to see if they were unconstitutional, unlawful, or candidly, the benefits did not outweigh the cost to consumers or businesses. And they had to go through and create an inventory of those within 60 days. The second one was actually in April, and it required them to go back and apply something you and I have talked about, and I know you've talked about with other guests, Loper Bright, as well as other Supreme Court cases to their regulations, and identify and inventory which ones were now subject to those new legal standards, and created a similar list of those and try and go back and repeal them now. And then last but not least, actually last week, the president issued an executive order that requires agencies to go through and identify every regulation that has a criminal prohibition or some type of criminal fine, fee, or punishment attached to it, and ensure that those things are posted publicly so that the American people know what these agencies are deciding is criminal. Because typically in our system, Congress is supposed to decide what's criminal, but these agencies are increasingly doing that. And it's estimated there's a couple 100,000 of these regulatory crimes out there, and people just don't know what they are. And so they're consistently being wrapped up into criminal charges, not knowing that something they did was wrong.
Yeah, we've talked to a number of guests, business owners who have gotten caught up in that tangle of regulatory rules. And what's incredible is when I listen to their story is you really realize that a lot of these agencies are just going ahead without the real authority, usurping the authority of Congress and going ahead and, really kind of persecuting some of these businesses and these people and, for like a decade. And it's just kind of blown my mind listening to some of these people talk about how they're, really trying to just do their job, save their business, but the government with, seemingly unlimited money to spend can just keep coming after them for things that, I think Congress wouldn't even necessarily like.
Yeah, it's sad. And so that's why we're asking Congress that they need to step up. They need to take a closer look at what agencies are doing, and they need to step in and stop those regulations from going into force whenever they're stepping outside of what the agency has been authorized to do.
Yeah. How does cutting regulations translate to saving taxpayers money?
Yeah, David, I think the easiest way to understand this is that regulations are like an agency's product. They are the things that an agency is going to enforce or that they are going to implement. And so the greater their number of regulations grow, the more staff and the more fiscal resources they need to enforce those regulations. Now, that's great and that's good whenever what they're doing is justified and that it's for public health or public safety, and we need a lot of these regulations in place. But that's bad whenever they're stepping outside of their authority, they're abusing their authority, or they're regulating things that candidly the benefits don't outweigh the cost. And so that's why you see this growth in agency budgets over time, is just that they're taking more and more authority and regulating more and more things. And so they need the staff and they need the resources to do it.
Yeah, I think in the past episodes, we've talked about just the idea of incentives, and that the wrong incentives are put in front of the agencies. It's like, hey, if you create more regulations, you need more people and more money and probably more power and influence. That's hopefully President Trump's reversing that.
Yes.
So speaking of making cuts, President Trump has tried to cut down on government agencies which fall under the executive branch, but has run into challenges. Could Congress do anything to help with that?
Yeah, they certainly can. And I think most folks are not aware that actually during the Reagan administration, Congress gave the president the authority to reorganize, shut down, combine agencies as he saw fit. All he needed to do was send a piece of paper to Congress saying, this is the action I'm going to take. They would rubber stamp it and move forward with that process. That has expired, though. At the end of Reagan's administration, that authority expired. So the president cannot constitutionally get rid of agencies without that authority being reauthorized. But guess what? It's great. There is a piece of legislation called the Reorganizing Government Act, which was introduced by Senator Mike Lee and Representative James Comer, that would reauthorize these statutes that are still in federal law. They still exist. The date just needs to be stricken from them to allow the current president and future presidents to be able to engage in that type of activity. And candidly, the president and the executive branch knows best how the agencies should be organized to carry out the things that Congress has asked them to carry out.
That'd be great. I mean, I think it just seemed like an easy fix. As we've talked about these different agencies, it's interesting to me how many were formed or made into cabinet level agencies during the Carter administration. I didn't realize Jimmy Carter was so busy with that. And then, some during the Reagan administration. But I imagine other than Homeland Security, which is a behemoth, we haven't seen much of that, in the last few decades. So that'd be pretty cool.
And David, I mean, you would assume something has changed in the past few decades. And so we should take a look at what exists and how it's structured and figure out a way to streamline or cut costs by combining folks and getting new leaders in place and really ensuring that there's not duplication across the system.
Yeah, I think you and I'd probably agree that constantly transforming, constantly taking a look at how agencies are creating value, how they're spending taxpayer money, how they're impacting taxpayers is probably a pretty important thing and it should happen on a dynamic, consistent basis.
Agreed. David, I mean, this is the way large organizations, whether they're nonprofits or corporations, consistently operate. They are consistently reevaluating what teams, departments, structures they have set up. And so the federal government should do the same.
Yeah, I agree. Let's say Congress does cut some of these regulations. Can anything be done to make sure that the next administration is limited on being able to have bureaucratic overreach?
David, that's right. I mean, it's vital that Congress doesn't just act for now, but they act for the future. And so there are two things we've been highlighting for members that we think are vitally, vitally important. There was the Guidance Out of Darkness Act, which you and I already talked about, or the GOOD Act, which just increases transparency, brings those regulations outside of the veil of darkness and really creates transparency for the American people. But there's also something we talked about earlier as well, we didn't really dig into, but it's called the REINS Act. The REINS Act is pretty simple. It says if a regulation is a major regulation, it has a certain level of impact on our economy, on businesses, on consumers. Congress just needs to get the chance to review it and approve it before it goes into effect. It's pretty straightforward. States across the country are adopting this. We're seeing it in Kansas and Wisconsin and Florida, where they've decided this is the path they want to move forward. And so we think this is an idea from the bottom, from the states, that is working well, that the federal government should consider as well.
Yeah, I've been so impressed with the momentum behind the REINS Act across the country in these states that are enacting it, and do that at the federal level. That'd be amazing. I think anything that we can do to kind of restore power to its appropriate place constitutionally, and Congress having some say is a pretty darn important thing. And we've really gotten away from that, unfortunately, with so many executive orders and just regulatory, agency overreach. So it's so exciting to hear about these efforts to kind of restore the right order.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, David. I mean, we need Congress to step up. That's the bottom line. If any of the good things that folks like your listeners, like the Trump administration, are doing, they want to see those live beyond these 4 years, we need Congress to step up. Yeah.
We just need Congress to do their job. Well, thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks for talking to us about DOGE and what Congress can do to lock in some of the good momentum that's happening here. So, there really is such momentum to see cuts made in really only a short amount of time to get it done. So hopefully Congress will step up and we'll start seeing changes being made. If you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.